I met Stannis Baratheon's daughter at Castle Black. She had Greyscale as a baby and was cured.
The most vicious disease across all of Westeros and Essos is supposed to have a story that transcends the ordinary and natural. And guess what? Greyscale is a much darker disease than you may have known. Of course, it turns your skin into stony serpentine scales by calcifying it, and we've all heard about that. However, it's believed that Greyscale, and a curse that brought it upon the Valyrians, is what led to the doom of old Valyria. And in this video, we'll begin by exploring said curse before moving on to the more minute details of how exactly Greyscale spread, what it does to a human body, how it can be treated, and its counterpart diseases in the real world. Before we get too far into our explanation though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Alright, without any further ado, let's jump into things. The origin of Greyscale. Prince Garren the Great's curse. The story of Greyscale begins with a man from ancient Essos who still inspires awe and dread. This was Prince Garren the Great. This legend dates back to the time of the Second Spice War, when Garren raised a colossal Rhoynish army at Croyane to stand against the Valyrian freehold. Baldacar's history of the Rhoynish Wars puts the number at a whopping 250,000 men. That's an entire swarm of warriors who believed in Garren's promise. As long as they stayed near the Rhoyne's waters, the Rhoynish water wizards would shield them from Valyrian dragons. These wizards were skilled sorcerers who manipulated river currents and invoked the Rhoyne's power in battle. After quick triumphs at Selhorys, Valisar, and Volon Theris, people hailed Garren the Great, hailing him as an almost savior-like figure for Rhoyne-based civilizations. And why not? This guy had killed 2 dragons and pushed the mighty Valyrians back. But Lady Luck left his side when he threatened Volantis, which back then was a prominent Valyrian colony. In a crushing defeat, thanks to more than 300 dragons, Valyrian dragon lords rallied to annihilate Garren's forces. The men of Volantis and Valyria, so the story goes, shoved him into a golden cage and hauled him north to watch the downfall of Croyane, once the shining city of the Rhoynar. That humiliation turned to horror as Garren saw his people enslaved, with Valyrians mocking him as he supposedly prayed to Mother Rhoyne, begging her to destroy their invaders. Legends say his captors laughed at his pleas, but that very night, as he prayed, the Rhoyne flooded out of season. Its waters surged with a force nobody expected, drowning the victorious conquerors right where they stood. Then came a thick fog that spread over Croyane. Out of nowhere, Valyrians began to die of Greyscale. The fog was held responsible for the deadly disease. A rumor was born, according to which the fallen Valyrian conquerors never truly left this realm. They lingered beneath the waters of the Sorrows, with their cold breath drifting up to form the eerie fog enveloping Croyane. Their hearts, rumored to have been cold and unfeeling, turned their flesh as stony and dead as their souls. Some believe Garren himself rose from the watery grave as the Shrouded Lord, someone who continues to wreak havoc upon travelers. Others go even further and claim this vengeance curse was the first step towards the doom of Valyria, though that cataclysm has plenty of other rumored causes, from overambitious blood sorcery to chain reactions in the Valyrian volcano fields. Greyscale explained. Greyscale affects the body in brutal ways. It calcifies the skin's surface. Early on, the hardened skin remains thin and brittle, so normal movement causes cracks. These cracks resemble thin ice splintering underfoot. Over time, the infected areas grow mottled gray and black. Once the tissue starts dying, it resembles reptilian scales or crumbled stone, hence Greyscale. While it may begin in small patches, it creeps across the body in relentless fashion. Shireen Baratheon, for instance, only ever had one patch on her left cheek as a young child, and though she was cured, the rough, stony texture remained as a permanent scar. Greyscale doesn't kill quickly. Victims may endure years of suffering before it attacks vital organs. In mid-stage infections, the skin feels like rock from head to toe, putting the victim in chronic agony. Unfortunately, they often linger for years like this, described as stone men who exist in exile, misery, or both. The advanced stage is worse because Greyscale eventually seeps deeper, hardening organs. When it reaches the brain, it triggers violent insanity, though very few see that final, terrible stage. Only some stone men quarantined in remote places, such as Valyria's ruins, survive long enough for Greyscale to affect the mind so severely. People don't label stone men as violent by nature. If one is forced to live in dreadful conditions, madness might eventually set in, but many stone men remain lost in their own misery, not rampaging around. Still, they face exile because of how fast the disease spreads. Greyscale transmits through skin contact or exposure to objects handled by infected individuals. One misplaced handshake or shared cloth can be enough if you're unlucky. This explains why some cultures quarantine the infected in colonies. Families weigh the risk of infection against compassion for loved ones. In the end, fear usually wins. Westeros sees cases now and then, both in the Seven Kingdoms and in the far north, but Essos experiences far more grayscale incidents, especially among impoverished communities that lack the resources for prevention or containment. Across the free cities, you'll find entire outcast enclaves, like the Stone Men in Old Valyria, where authorities dump infected individuals to keep them away from the healthy. We see a flicker of hope in how Samwell Tarly treated Jorah Mormont. Grayscale forms a hardened tumor-like crust on the skin. Underneath, the body tries to fight back, producing pus around the diseased layer. If a skilled person peels away that hardened tissue, an excruciating procedure by the way, and applies an ointment that blocks secondary infections, the immune system might rally and beat down whatever remains of the disease. This approach is obviously risky, painful, and often not guaranteed to work. Therefore, Sam's success can be hailed as equal parts luck and skill.
You could strike at him by striking at you.
Gilly wouldn't do that.
What microbes could cause the spread and inflate the infection rate? Grayscale probably stems from a tricky infectious agent that spreads rapidly through skin contact. Different microbes cause skin diseases, yet not all match Grayscale's fast transmission and the way it thrives on fabric. Staphylococci and streptococci often infect skin, but conditions like boils and cellulitis look nothing like thick, scaly plaque. Anthrax is also gram-positive bacterium and spreads in several ways, but it doesn't pass from person to person through direct skin contact. Mycobacteria, such as tuberculosis and leprosy, may sometimes infect skin, though they usually spread by respiratory droplets and their clinical patterns aren't much like Greyscale. Viruses seem to be the top contenders because herpes, HPV, and pox viruses jump easily from skin to skin, survive on surfaces, and can move fast. In Jorah Mormont's case, the scaly patches appeared at the site of infection within a day, without a deep wound that might have introduced germs. The pathogen also caused pus, which can only come from bacteria or certain viruses like herpes, but in this story, a virus remains the stronger possibility. Grayscale's high infectivity and quick onset point to a smallpox-like or HPV-like microbe rather than a standard bacterial or mycobacterial culprit. Greyscale versus leprosy. People sometimes compare Greyscale to leprosy. That parallel stops when you look closer because leprosy doesn't spread by skin contact and isn't all that contagious in general. Leprosy thickens the skin, but it lacks the tough, scaly rashes Greyscale displays. It also attacks nerves, causing lost sensation and shortened digits. Most leprosy cases probably result from inhaling droplets from infected individuals, or in some regions of the southern US, contact with armadillos. Leprosy's link to animals and unusual features makes it very different from Grayscale's rapid spread through person-to-person touch.
This is quite advanced. And beyond.
Does it affect only humans? So far, Greyscale has not been confirmed to appear in other species. Dragons, armadillos, and even White Walkers show no sign of it. That leaves humans as the only confirmed hosts, though one can guess the disease could jump to other creatures if conditions allowed. The books don't describe any scenario where animals exhibit stony plaque.
They said you're a traitor.
I am, child.
I don't.
The curious case of Shireen Baratheon. Shireen Baratheon's odd skin pattern raises questions. She developed a patch on one side of her face but avoided full body spread. Early and aggressive treatment may have stopped the infection before it advanced. Her father's wizards gained credit for halting it, though there might be another angle. Shireen's face shows a mosaic-like distribution, which sometimes happen if certain cells carry unique genetic changes. Mosaicism occurs in creatures like calico cats, whose coats have distinct patches of color. In Shireen's skin, only some areas have been made vulnerable to this virus-like agent, which limited the disease to that side of her face. It's also possible Greyscale comes from a dormant genetic trait activated by viral exposure. Whatever the exact cause, Greyscale stands out as an insidious infection that creeps across skin, produces scale-like plaque, and can lead to advanced stages marked by disfigurement. Jorah's slow progression, the presence of pus, and the ability to pick it up from infected objects all suggest a viral agent with strong transmissibility. It doesn't match leprosy's lower contagion or bacterial infections that typically require deeper breaks in the skin. That distinction drives home the idea that Greyscale likely mirrors pox or HP viruses that spread swiftly and find ways to survive outside of a host for long enough to hitch a ride on clothing. If someone could isolate the virus responsible for Greyscale, maybe alchemists or maesters could craft a vaccine to protect people at risk. Or, in a world of arcane powers, they'd likely brew up spells or potions to stop its advance. Either way, halting the disease would require unraveling exactly how this strange contagion manipulates skin cells. What do the books say about Greyscale? George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire novels describe Greyscale as a disease that typically affects children, especially in damp, cold environments. The infection causes skin to become stiff and cracked, so the victim's body shows patterns resembling flaking stone. Then, the skin darkens to gray or black and loses sensation. Shireen was lucky. She caught it young, and her father, Stannis, gathered every possible remedy. In the novels, she's left with black and gray mottled tissue on her face. She survived, but the scarring stayed. On the show, she still has the textural scarring, but without the deep discoloration, because the show wanted her to appear less severe and to heighten the contrast with characters who have an advanced form of the disease. In the books, Greyscale is far more prevalent in Essos than Westeros. Most eastern enclaves, from Pentos to Myr, see it frequently, with quarantines set up in remote ruins. It's not an ideal solution, but it keeps infected people out of healthy towns. Westeros isn't immune, but fewer cases pop up there compared to Essos. Certain corners of Westeros, such as Dragonstone's damp climate, see the occasional outbreak. Shireen's case started there, likely from an infected doll purchased from a merchant. The Iron Islands, Drab and Bleak, also see the disease. Balon Greyjoy's older brother Harlan apparently contracted Greyscale in childhood. Rumors differ on how he died. Euron Greyjoy confessed to murdering him by pinching his nose shut until he choked, since his mouth was locked by the disease. Adults catch Greyscale, it's almost always fatal. A slightly better chance, though chancier might mean they only get disfigured instead of killed. A variety of desperate measures, lime application, mustard poultices, scalding baths, they slow the spread, but they rarely offer true cures. The disease creeps forward, limp along for months or years, or manage as best they can in quarantine colonies. Blindness is possible if it crosses the eyes, and it can kill by eventually petrifying vital organs. Amputation can help if the infection is confined to a specific area, but that's always a gamble. Tests include pricking fingers or toes daily to check for sensation. If someone doesn't feel the blade, infection has likely set in. Characters like Tyrion Lannister, after meeting stone men in the novels, test themselves in exactly this way, poking fingers to confirm that they still sense pain. Occasionally, children beat the infection. Shireen stands as a prime example, but that cure remains mysterious. In Beration, Stannis threw every known remedy at her, so no one can say which method made the difference. Maybe it was pure luck. Even after the disease stops, some superstitions claim survivors remain dormant carriers, though Meisters generally disagree, believing these individuals pose no infection risk to others. The Wildlings call it the Grey Death, which sums up how they view Greyscale, a near certain death sentence, overshadowed by fear that it might spread in close-knit communities. Anyone who recovers is branded unclean, so wildling parents sometimes euthanize infected children to protect the group. This is the bleak reality in the far north, where they can't afford to let an outbreak run rampant. The novels talk about sightings in the blasted ruins of Old Valyria, Oros, and Tyria. Terms, fans often compare Greyscale to medieval depictions of leprosy or advanced smallpox, conditions that disfigure or scar. Both diseases carried huge social stigma. Greyscale is more contagious than real-life leprosy, which typically spreads only through extended contact with bodily fluids. The show and books portray Greyscale as catchable through brief contact. Shireen Baratheon appeared in HBO's Game of Thrones. She had no official mention that her facial scarring was Greyscale until the updated HBO Viewer's Guide in Season 4. Season 5 does the show name it in dialogue, courtesy of Shireen and Gilly's conversation. His name, though she recalls how it killed two of her sisters in isolation. Enough, in the books, Jorah Mormont never catches Greyscale. That calls John Connington, also known as Griff, during his quest to install the supposed Aegon Targaryen on the Iron Throne. Pure, stoically accepting his doom, already infected, but we see how that weighs on his every decision. Greyscale in Game of Thrones. was. One of the first direct Greyscale references on screen comes when Gilly notices Shireen's scar. Shireen explains that it's from Greyscale, which she caught as a baby but survived. Sisters who got infected, ending in a truly painful and grimdark final stretch, so he wouldn't risk direct contact and hauled them into the woods to die. In Volantis, Tyrion sees a red priestess preaching about how the Lord of Light hears all prayers, even the stone men's. Tyrion cynically retorts that prayer won't stop Greyscale any more than it can ward off the plague. Also hear Stannis Baratheon detail how Shireen picked up the disease from a doll purchased off a ship from Dorne. He speaks of how everyone urged him to send her away, maybe to live her short life among the stone men in Valyria, but Stannis wouldn't abandon her. He possible expert, maesters, healers, apothecaries, and somehow that overwhelming variety of attempts halted the disease's spread. Left Shireen's face scarred, but it didn't claim her life. We get to see the true extent and effect of Greyscale when Tyrion and Jorah sail past the smoking ruins of Valyria en route to Meereen. Advance Greyscale leap at them from the shadows. Tyrion plunges underwater to save himself. When he regains consciousness, he discovers Jorah saved him, but Jorah's arm was infected in the process, conceals the spreading gray patch from Tyrion. In 6, Jorah's Greyscale has advanced further, creeping up his arm. It impresses him about the inevitable outcome, but Jorah is no fool. He knows what the disease means. In Vaes Dothrak, he reveals his infection, presumably to avoid harming her or her allies, but Daenerys, thanks to her typical headstrong spirit, refuses to dismiss him, cure, and return to her side. Departs carrying an unlikely glimmer of hope that somehow he'll cheat this monstrous disease. 7, we find out how Jorah's search for a cure ends when he arrives at the Citadel with a large patch of Greyscale covering his arm and shoulder. He asks Samwell Tarly whether Daenerys has landed in Westeros. Sam learns about a forbidden procedure in an old medical text. The maesters have banned it because of its high failure rate, plus the serious risk of infection to the physician, worth saving anyways. He pieces away the diseased tissue layer by layer, then applies a medicinal ointment to the raw flesh, a process with a good chance of lethal side effects, since older patients have less resilience. Sam proceeds anyways, prying off each chunk of Greyscale while Jorah nearly faints from pain. It might have set in, but Sam's ointment apparently prevents complications. He succeeds, Jorah recovers, and Sam is slightly schooled by the Archmaester for ignoring the ban. Ignoring the ban. How was Greyscale brought to life in the show? Shireen mentions that the full facial prosthetic for her Greyscale scar once took 3 hours to apply and another 2 or 3 hours to remove. The makeup team managed to shave that down to 2 hours. Makeup chair for long, grueling sessions, though Shireen's final result was only partial coverage on one side of her face. Men who attacked Jorah and Tyrion had to wear large foam prosthetics covering their heads, shoulders, and torsos. That process took around 4 hours. When you see them lunge from the fog in that horrifying scene, you're glimpsing a painstaking collaborative effort between costumers, prosthetic designers, and visual effects artists. Mark the stark difference between Shireen's early stage scarring and the Stone Men's advanced, more savage transformations. The Rhoynish legacy and Greyscale's cultural impact. Scale and lore almost always goes back to the legend of Prince Garin the Great and the city of Croyane. Civilization, known for living in concert with the mighty Rhoyne River, had developed a rich culture tied deeply to water magic. Called priestesses or priests of the Rhoyne in some stories, could shape or command currents. The backbone of Garin's strategy. Stand against water-based sorcery if the Rhoynar remained near their lifeblood, the river. After Garin West at Selhoris, Valisar, and Voluntheris, the Rhoynar morale soared. Everyone assumed that if the water wizards could defeat dragons on those battlefields, they could handle the entire Valyrian freehold. This was how that overconfidence backfired. They grouped, unleashed their full might, and annihilated the Rhoynish host. And near the Rhoyne fell in the aftershocks of that war, from its devastation to the spread of Greyscale. Greyscale left a cultural imprint. People across the free cities developed superstitions around it, some believing it to be an echo of Garin's curse. It was a simple pestilence thriving in humid marshy lands. Old Esori folklore, the more references appear about the stony death or river plague, usually revolve around drowned warriors rising to drag travelers underwater or thick mists swirling with the souls of the dead. The notion that Greyscale has supernatural elements, even though the medical angle, like Sam's procedure, contradicts that stance. Rhoynar people ended up in Dorne under Princess Nymeria. They carried old tales and customs from the Rhoyne, but it's unclear if they brought any direct knowledge of Greyscale's cure. What is evident is that the disease never took deep root in Dorne the same way it did along the Rhoyne's banks, due to the region's hot, arid climate or simply fewer infected arrivals. Stories suggest that the lethal flood in Croy Royane rattled their dominance. This must have carried Greyscale back to their colonies. To directly trigger the doom, it might have sowed seeds of chaos and paranoia. The Valyrians prized their mastery of fire and blood, forging the greatest empire of their time, but no empire stands forever. Powerful curses, hidden under the Valyrian peninsula, backfired on them. Date among many for what ultimately destroyed the freehold. In modern times, in the period of the novels and show, many people still regard Greyscale with a sense of taboo. Iron Islands to the Dothraki Sea whisper that it's punishment for arrogance. This reflects a hardened heart, or so the superstitions claim. At a level, quarantine remains the most common response. They'd attempt cures with various ointments, potions, or surgeries, but the average peasant or common soldier can't afford that. They usually send infected individuals into the wilderness or to specialized leper-like colonies. Between the novels and the show revolve mainly around who contracts Greyscale and how they handle it. Meet John Connington, while show watchers see Jorah Mormont in the role of the afflicted adult warrior. Both men reflect how grown-ups face near certain doom from the disease. Connington quietly despairs, hoping to achieve one last grand act by restoring Aegon Targaryen. Jorah tries to hang on until he can serve Daenerys one last time. Both arcs highlight how personal loyalty intersects with hopeless sickness in Martin's world. So yeah, that's everything we know about Greyscale, probably the most vicious disease across Westeros and Essos. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.